What if the story you've been told about power, secrecy, and authority is only a shadow of a much larger truth? Imagine waking up one day to discover that forces beyond human systems had issued an order, and that order caused one of the most powerful investigative bodies on Earth, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, to move. Not because of politics, not because of crime, but because of something they cannot explain, cannot control, and perhaps cannot even admit exists. The question is not whether such a thing could happen. The question is why the idea alone makes people uneasy. Across history, societies have whispered about individuals who seem marked by destiny. Not rulers, not celebrities, not the wealthy or the loud, but quiet figures who appear at turning points, who influence others without force, and who carry an unusual clarity about right and wrong. Some call them visionaries. Others call them disruptors. Still others dismiss them entirely. Yet one pattern repeats in every era. Whenever such individuals begin to be noticed, resistance rises around them. Why does attention so often shift from curiosity to suspicion? Power structures, whether political, social, or cultural, are built on predictability. They rely on patterns that can be tracked, measured, and anticipated. But what happens when someone doesn't fit any pattern? What happens when a person's influence spreads without advertisement, without funding, without a visible campaign? Systems that monitor everything are designed to detect threats. But what if the greatest disruption is not a threat at all, just a presence that refuses to conform? Consider how quickly labels are assigned. The unfamiliar becomes suspicious. The unconventional becomes dangerous. The independent becomes monitored. Is it because such people are truly risky, or because they cannot be easily categorized? Throughout time, those who challenged assumptions were often questioned long before they were understood. Not because they broke laws, but because they broke expectations. There is a quiet tension between institutions and individuals who cannot be predicted. Institutions seek order. Unpredictable individuals represent possibility, and possibility is unsettling because it suggests that reality is not as controlled as it appears. When people begin to sense that someone operates from a deeper conviction, a conviction not tied to status or approval, curiosity grows. And where curiosity grows, scrutiny often follows. But here is the deeper mystery. Why do stories about chosen individuals appear in nearly every culture on Earth? Different languages, different philosophies, different centuries, yet the same theme keeps surfacing. Certain people seem guided by an unseen purpose. Not elevated above humanity, not worshipped, not supernatural, but somehow aligned with a sense of direction that others struggle to define. Is this merely myth repeated so often that it feels real? Or does the persistence of the idea hint at something embedded in human perception itself? Perhaps the real question is not whether such people exist. Perhaps the real question is why societies react so strongly to the possibility. Why does the notion of a person who cannot be easily influenced trigger investigation, observation, even quiet concern? Is it fear of disruption, or fear of losing control over a narrative that has always belonged to institutions rather than individuals? When whispers spread that unseen forces are paying attention, imaginations ignite. Some assume conspiracy, others assume coincidence. But beneath both reactions lies the same realization. There may be dimensions of influence that statistics cannot measure and authority cannot command. And if that is true, then the presence of even one person who embodies that influence would challenge everything we think we understand about power itself. So ask yourself this: if someone truly carried a purpose that did not come from public approval, not from wealth, not from recognition. Would the world celebrate them or watch them? There is something deeply unsettling about a person who cannot be steered, not persuaded by trends, not silenced by pressure, not reshaped by reward or punishment. History shows that systems are comfortable with opposition. They can predict, critics they can study, and movements they can map. But an individual whose motivation seems to come from an inner compass rather than an external influence introduces a variable no structure can fully calculate. And when something cannot be calculated, it cannot be controlled. Think about how observation works in the modern world. Surveillance is often justified as protection. Monitoring is explained as precaution. Information gathering is framed as responsibility. These practices are built on a simple principle: the more data you collect, the fewer surprises you face. Yet surprises still happen. Not technological surprises, not economic ones, but human ones. Individuals appear who do not follow expected psychological patterns. They do not respond to pressure the way analysts predict. They do not change direction when incentives shift. They remain steady, as if anchored to something deeper than circumstance. What does a system do when it encounters that kind of person? Curiosity is the first reaction. Analysts observe. They compare behavior to models. They test assumptions. But if the person continues to defy prediction, curiosity can slowly transform into concern. Not because the individual has done anything wrong, but because unpredictability itself is treated as a potential risk. In environments designed to reduce uncertainty, certainty becomes a kind of currency. And anyone who cannot be explained begins to look like a question mark that refuses to be erased. This is where speculation begins to grow. When observers cannot identify a visible source for someone's conviction, they start searching for hidden ones. Is there a network behind them? A hidden sponsor? A quiet organization guiding their steps? Files may be opened, reports compiled, patterns reviewed. Agencies, such as the Central Intelligence Agency, exist precisely to understand influence, especially influence that does not announce itself. Their purpose is not mystery, it is clarity. Yet clarity is hardest to achieve when the subject of observation is guided by something internal rather than external. But here is the paradox. The more intensely someone is analyzed, the more their stillness stands out. When pressure increases and a person does not fracture, when attention intensifies and they do not perform, when scrutiny rises and they do not retreat, observers are left with a puzzle. Most people change under observation. Most adjust when watched. Most soften or harden depending on incentives. Someone who remains unchanged creates a kind of silence in the data, and silence is often louder than noise. Why does this matter? Because societies tend to trust what they can measure. Numbers feel safe. Charts feel reliable. Predictive models feel authoritative. Yet the human spirit has always contained elements that escape measurement. Courage cannot be graphed with perfect accuracy. Integrity cannot be quantified like currency. Purpose cannot be reduced to an algorithm. And when a person seems to operate primarily from those immeasurable qualities, they represent a reminder that not everything meaningful can be calculated. This is the point where rumors are born. Not always malicious rumors, sometimes simply questions repeated so often they start to sound like conclusions. Who are they really? Why do they remain unaffected? What do they know that others don't? The imagination fills gaps that evidence cannot. Stories spread. Interpretations multiply. And slowly, a narrative begins to form around the individual, a narrative shaped less by facts and more by fascination. Yet beneath all speculation lies a quieter possibility. Maybe what unsettles observers is not the person themselves, but what that person represents. If one individual can live with clarity that does not depend on approval, what does that suggest about everyone else? If one person can stand steady without external validation, what does that imply about the structures built to provide it? And that leads to a question few pause long enough to consider. When attention intensifies around someone who refuses to be shaped by pressure, is the world witnessing a threat or witnessing a mirror? There comes a moment in every era when attention shifts from observing a person to questioning what surrounds them. Not their actions alone, but the ripple effects they leave behind. Influence is rarely loud at first. It begins quietly, almost invisibly, like a subtle change in atmosphere that most people feel before they can explain. Conversations start to sound different. Priorities begin to shift. People who once felt uncertain suddenly speak with conviction. And whenever a transformation spreads without a visible campaign or command, observers start asking a deeper question. Where is this coming from? Influence without a visible source unsettles systems designed to trace origins. Institutions are built on cause and effect. They expect every outcome to point back to a measurable cause. But occasionally, a person appears whose impact seems disproportionate to their resources. No massive platform, no coordinated backing, no machinery behind them. Yet their presence alone seems to awaken something in others. Not obedience, not blind loyalty, but awareness. And awareness is powerful, because once someone begins to see clearly, they rarely return to confusion willingly. This is when scrutiny intensifies. Analysts may not say it publicly, but internally the question becomes urgent. What is the mechanism behind this influence? Is it psychological charisma? Is it timing? Is it coincidence? Or is it something less tangible, something that cannot be easily dissected or reproduced? Organizations tasked with studying global patterns, including institutions like the National Security Agency, are trained to notice anomalies. Their work depends on identifying signals that do not match expected patterns. And a human being who becomes a living anomaly naturally draws attention. But anomalies are not always threats. Sometimes they are catalysts. A catalyst does not force change, it accelerates it. It reveals what was already present but dormant. When certain individuals enter a space, and others suddenly feel motivated, honest, or courageous, the effect can look mysterious from the outside. Observers may search for hidden tactics, unaware that the true cause might be far simpler and far more difficult to measure authenticity. Genuine conviction has a resonance that cannot be manufactured. People sense it instinctively, even when they cannot articulate why. Still, the unknown has always stirred suspicion alongside fascination. Throughout history, whenever someone's presence sparked transformation in others, narratives formed around them. Some narratives praised them, others questioned them. A few tried to redefine them entirely. This pattern repeats because uncertainty invites interpretation, and interpretation often reveals more about the observer than the observed. When people cannot explain something, they project explanations that fit their own expectations or fears. Imagine being tasked with evaluating a person whose influence grows without strategy, whose message spreads without promotion, whose steadiness remains unchanged under pressure. Reports would be written, behavioral profiles drafted, comparisons made to known psychological models. Yet, what if every model fails to account for them? What if every attempt to categorize them leaves something essential unexplained? At that point, the investigation is no longer just about the individual. It becomes about the limits of the system doing the investigating. And this is where the story turns inward, because the presence of someone who cannot be easily defined forces a quiet realization. Not everything meaningful fits inside a definition. Some qualities reveal themselves only through experience, not analysis. Some forms of influence are felt rather than measured. Some kinds of purpose cannot be traced back to a visible origin point, so the tension grows. Observation continues, questions multiply, interpretations compete. Yet the individual at the center of it all may remain unchanged, unaffected by speculation, untouched by rumor, steady in a way that seems almost unfamiliar in a world built on reaction. And that steadiness raises a final, unsettling thought. If a person can stand firmly without being shaped by the forces around them, what does that suggest about the forces themselves? And so the focus shifts from investigation to realization. Because after all the observation, all the speculation, all the quiet monitoring and whispered theories, one truth begins to surface. The real mystery was never the individual. The real mystery was why their existence stirred such intense attention in the first place. What is it about a steady, principled human presence that unsettles a world accustomed to noise and reaction? It may be because consistency is rare. In a culture that often rewards performance over sincerity, a person who lives in alignment with their values can appear almost unfamiliar. They do not adjust themselves to match the mood of the crowd. They do not reshape their voice to fit expectations. They remain the same in private as in public. And when people encounter that kind of authenticity, something inside them recognizes it immediately, not as spectacle, but as truth, not as authority, but as clarity. Systems understand how to respond to force. They understand how to respond to rebellion. They even understand how to respond to opposition. But authenticity is different. Authenticity does not attack, does not demand, does not manipulate. It simply stands. And standing, quietly and firmly, can sometimes be more disruptive than shouting, because a person who stands without fear reminds others that they, too, might be capable of standing. That reminder alone can change the emotional climate of a room, a community, even a generation. This is why attention often intensifies around such individuals. Not necessarily because they are seen as dangerous, but because they are difficult to interpret. Agencies built to analyze patterns, including international bodies like Interpol, rely on signals that can be tracked and understood. Yet inner conviction leaves no digital trail. Purpose does not appear on surveillance screens. Integrity cannot be intercepted or decoded. The most influential qualities a person can possess are often the least visible to instruments designed to measure influence. Over time, observers may begin to realize that what they are witnessing is not a puzzle to solve, but a phenomenon to understand. Some people carry a presence that awakens reflection in others. Not admiration, not dependency, but reflection. They cause others to ask themselves questions they had avoided. Am I living truthfully? Am I acting with intention? Am I choosing my path, or simply following one laid out for me? These questions can be quietly revolutionary, because they shift authority from the outside world to the inner self. And that is where the idea of hidden concern begins to dissolve. Perhaps nothing is being hidden at all. Perhaps what looks like secrecy is simply misunderstanding. When something does not fit existing categories, it is often placed under scrutiny until it can be explained, but not everything meaningful was designed to fit categories. Some things exist precisely to expand them. In the end, the phrase, chosen ones, may not describe a select group singled out by some external decree. It may describe anyone who chooses clarity over confusion, courage over compliance, sincerity over performance. If that is true, then the phenomenon is not rare at all. It is simply unnoticed until someone embodies it so fully that others cannot help but see. So the final question is not who is being watched, or who is being investigated, or who is being discussed behind closed doors. The final question is far more personal. If the world sometimes reacts strongly to those who live with unwavering purpose, what might happen if more people chose to live that way? Would systems resist them, or would systems begin to change? Because history suggests a quiet pattern. Whenever individuals live with genuine conviction, they do not just challenge expectations. They redefine what everyone else believes is possible. There is a subtle turning point that few people recognize while it is happening. It is the moment when curiosity transforms into awakening. Not a dramatic awakening filled with spectacle, but a quiet internal shift, the kind that changes how a person sees everything afterward. When someone encounters a voice, a presence, or even an idea that resonates deeply within them, it can feel as though a hidden door has opened. Suddenly, questions they never thought to ask begin to surface. Assumptions they once trusted begin to loosen, and the world, which once seemed fixed and predictable, starts to feel wider than they imagined. This is the effect that has always puzzled observers. Influence that does not rely on authority challenges the very definition of power. Most people are taught that power belongs to positions, titles, or institutions, yet time and again, history reveals individuals with no official status who shape conversations more profoundly than those who hold formal control. Analysts may try to trace the mechanics of such influence, examining speech patterns, behavior, networks, and timing. Organizations devoted to studying social dynamics, including research divisions connected to groups like the United Nations, often analyze how ideas spread across cultures. Still, the deepest forms of inspiration rarely follow predictable formulas. Why? Because genuine inspiration does not behave like information. Information can be transmitted instantly. Inspiration must be felt. It passes from one mind to another not through force, but through recognition. A person hears something true, and something inside them responds before logic has time to interfere. That response cannot be programmed, and it cannot be manufactured on command. It is personal, immediate, and real. This is what makes certain individuals appear so mysterious to outside observers. Their influence is not based on persuasion techniques or calculated strategies. Instead, it flows naturally from alignment between what they believe, what they say, and how they live. That alignment creates a kind of coherence that others sense instinctively. In a world filled with contradictions, coherence stands out. In a culture filled with noise, clarity carries. And when clarity appears, people listen. But listening leads to reflection, and reflection leads to change. Not forced change, not imposed change, but voluntary change. A person who begins to think differently soon begins to act differently. They may speak more honestly. They may choose more carefully. They may stop following paths that once felt automatic. From the outside, these shifts can look sudden, even suspicious. Observers might wonder what caused such transformation. Was it influence? Was it persuasion? Was it pressure? Yet often the answer is far simpler. The change began the moment the individual realized they had the freedom to choose it. This realization is powerful because it cannot be taken away once discovered. Someone who understands their own agency sees the world through a new lens. They no longer assume that authority defines truth. They no longer assume that popularity defines value. They begin to measure life by deeper standards, standards that do not fluctuate with public opinion. And when many people reach that realization, even quietly, the atmosphere of an entire community can shift. Perhaps this is what truly captures attention when certain individuals rise into public awareness. It is not that they control others. It is that they remind others of something they had forgotten. They remind them that conviction is possible, that integrity is possible, that living with intention is possible. These reminders are not commands. They are invitations. So maybe nothing is being hidden after all. Maybe what seems like secrecy is simply the world struggling to explain something that does not fit its usual explanations. Because when a person lives with unwavering purpose, they do not just change their own path. They illuminate the possibility that everyone else could do the same. And once that possibility is seen, it can never be entirely unseen.